sinners were approaching to listen to him, and the Pharisees and scribes were complaining. This man welcomed sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. What man among you who has 100 sheep loses one of them, does not leave 99 in the open field and go after the lost one until he finds it? When he has found it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, and coming home, he calls his friends and neighbors together, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." I tell you, in that same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who don't need repentance. Or what woman who has 10 silver coins, if she loses one, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found the silver coin I lost." I tell you, in the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who repents. The sermon topic title today is Who Jesus Hangs Out With. Have you ever felt lost? All of us some days feel more lost than found, more wrong than right. Isn't that how you feel some days, that you feel more lost than usual? Perhaps we acted like unthinking sheep and wandered off. Maybe we have felt like a person who doesn't understand the questions on a math test when everyone else seems to have figured it out. Have you ever felt like that sitting in a math class or in a class where you're taking a test and everybody's turning their papers in and you're still there on question number 1 trying to figure out what to write down? I've been there a lot. So many things make us feel lost. The sudden loss of a job, debts we wonder if we can ever repay, a broken marriage, a loss of someone we love. Sometimes we feel lost when we lose our patience, our sense of humor, our integrity, or our purpose. And it's been suggested, and I believe it, that this lost feeling is a longing we have for God's grace. That is ingrained in every human, whether or not we believe it or not. We're longing for God's grace. In a gospel lesson this morning, Jesus tells us 2 parables. In the context of these parables, or the reason Jesus tells them, it's because all the tax collectors and sinners would gather around him to listen. And the Pharisees and the legal experts were disgusted by this. They grumbled to one another. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. It is interesting how, in the gospel, Jesus spends so much time eating, drinking, talking, teaching, walking, fishing, and hanging out with folks who the Pharisees and legal experts call sinners. We might ask ourselves, what is a Pharisee? Pharisees were the leading Jewish religious sect in Jesus' time. They believed in following the letter to the law. Exactly. They had to do exactly what the law said. The word Pharisees itself comes from the Hebrew word separate. And so the Pharisees sought to separate themselves from the social outcasts. And in their minds, Jesus must do the same if he's going to hang or get to hang out with them. If Jesus wanted to fit in, he had to do exactly like them. But Jesus is friends to whoever will have him. It just so happens this turns out to be the social outcast, the marginalized, the lost, the lonely. These folks who became Jesus' disciples. The disciples were the outcast, the lonely, the ones searching. These are the folks who flocked to Jesus. These were tax collectors and sinners that Jesus welcomed and eats with. These are the people that the Pharisees were grumbling about. What if good church-going folks today were seen Jesus hosting a dinner party where he invited drug dealers, pimps, muggers, thieves, sex traffickers, gang leaders, terrorists, unfaithful spouses, cheating taxpayers, child abusers, and so on? What would you do if you saw Jesus doing that? Would we mumble and grumble? Is this a guy we would want to hang out with as well? Would you want to go hang out with the people that Jesus would hang out with? Now, to be sure, the Pharisees and other religious leaders were invited to Jesus' parties as well. Everybody was invited. The only problem was that they wouldn't stay or even go in if these lowlifes were there. They kept themselves out. What would we do? What would you do if you got invited to a party like that? To an event where the outcasts were there? In verse 2, when the grumblers say, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them," the word used for welcome literally means host. In other words, Jesus is the host of sinners, which means Jesus chooses these folks to be his friends. He seeks them out. He invites them to be with him. Jesus chooses to hang out with the misfits and the outcasts. Who remembers the Christmas movie, Christmas Story, where they had Misfit Island with broken toys? Jesus would have been right there in the middle of all those misfits. He'd been out there on the island with them, welcoming them, eating with them. In Luke 19:10, Jesus declares, "The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." So in the first parable, Jesus likens himself to a shepherd who goes searching for the lost sheep until he finds it. And even though the Israel history is full of reference of God as a shepherd, by the time the first century, when Jesus was telling the parable, shepherds were not very highly thought of. They had gotten a bad reputation for being thieves and trespassers, and most of them were very poor, and the occupation of shepherd was dirty and backbreaking work. So the unspoken message in this parable is that Jesus is one of the outcasts himself. God came to earth to save as a homeless outcast, a person living on the margins of the rejected society. Have you ever felt like an outcast? I have many times. Ever been bullied? Ever been left out of the conversation? Ever been the only one of your friends that wasn't invited to a party? You get phone calls. Are you going to the party? What party? Have you ever been that person that was left out? And as an adult, have you ever felt like you weren't as successful as you should be or thought you would be? Have you ever thought that you could have done more in your life? Have you ever tried to make friends with someone who won't even give you time of day? That person that you want to be friends with that won't even speak to you. Jesus stands in solidarity with the lost of the world, which even the Pharisees don't realize it included them. He wanted to be their friend too. So, Jesus compares himself to a lowly shepherd who searches for the lost sheep until he finds it, and then is so full of joy, he throws a party to celebrate the one he found. In the second parable, Jesus likens himself to a woman who searches for a lost coin, searches and searches and searches until she finds it. And when she finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors saying, "Celebrate with me. I have found the lost coin. To put the second parable in perspective, think of a one-room stone house with dirt floor, tiny door, no windows. It would be very easy to lose a shiny coin in a place like that. No light, dirt floor, where the dust could cover up the coin if you just took a step. You consider that the money lost was a drachma. A drachma is not much money in the grand scheme of things, but it's a day's wages for a minimum wage worker back in those times. Would a business executive drop everything to search for a check for one day's pay at minimum wage? That's a drop in the bucket for some of the corporate executives I know. They probably wouldn't stop everything they're doing to search for that one check. But what does a woman do in the story? First, she lights a lamp. Then she sweeps the floor slowly and carefully, looking everywhere for the lost coin. This is a parable of proportion. The well-to-do Pharisees considered that coin to be peanuts and not worth their time. But even the smallest is important to God. Even the smallest is important to God. It's not only worth the search, its discovery is worthy of celebration. A big old party of epic proportion to find that one. It has been written and noted that no Pharisees would have ever dreamed of God being like this. They had dreams of God coming in magnificent glory, being right there with him. That's why they couldn't accept who Jesus was, because he was with the outcast. He wasn't right there with them. As a matter of fact, they thought God wanted to liberate the lost, the unclean, and sinners, that he wanted to do away with them. And they thought this was the way things should be. A great Jewish scholar has admitted that this is an absolute radical new thing which Jesus taught about God, that God actually searches for us. But this is who God is. And we find this out only through Jesus Christ. God became flesh. He came to seek and save that which is lost. There's nothing more humbling than the feeling of being lost. Have you ever been out and taking a trip somewhere and get lost? How humbling is it to stop and ask directions? I know it is hard for a man, but now we got GPS that tells us where to go. But we can still get lost with GPS. If we don't have God with us to lead us on the path that he has for us, we can be lost. We are the sinners, and Jesus is the host. He invites us. He serves us. And we are found as we come and joyfully join in the party. When he finds us, it's a big party in heaven. Just think about all your family and friends that's been praying for you for years. When you find Jesus, the party that they're having. We might not see it because they might be gone before us in the pearly gates. But they're throwing a big party because you have been found. Jesus was searching. We are found. How can we not rejoice because of and with God for such love and such grace as this? How can we not rejoice when that one person comes to know Jesus like we do? How can we not rejoice with all the great things that happen when someone receives Christ in their heart? For I know I was prayed for a long time before I accepted Jesus. I got to figuring out I was mid-40s when I accepted Jesus in my life. But it was a joy for my wife that had been praying for me years. She was dragging the kids to church by herself because I worked every Sunday, so I didn't have to go. But It was a big rejoice for her. Now look at us now. We're both doing work in churches. And I know that my mom and dad above are praising. I know my mom is, because she passed away before I accepted Christ in my life. She was one of the reasons why I did. And I still have a little Bible that my grandmother gave me back when I was in elementary school. I think I was in kindergarten. I'm going to pass it on to my granddaughter, because she's wanting the Bible to read. But just think of the joy in heaven when that one person accepts Christ in their life, that lost sheep that we were once before. Amen. Let us stand for closing hymn, Standing on the